somebody's case, review it, and give a 6-page response as to why I deserved to be in America. I finally was vindicated. But it took 7 years. 7 years, you guys. But the thing I also want to point out is that there are people that I know who were on this journey with me back then who are still undocumented right now. I have friends who went to law school, who are, celebrated in their profession, in their expertise, who've been undocumented for over 20 years. Okay? So that's why I also share my story, just to illustrate how these situations are being further exacerbated even today, especially today. The other thing I also want to mention is during the time the Board of Immigration was reviewing my case, that's when I decided to go public with my case, right? That is when the attorney that I hired, because I was then working, because I had work authorization, I was basically scrambling up whatever cash I had to pay her, said, you gotta go public with your case, Martine. There's nothing else we can do but you going public. That's the only option. I was terrified. Why was I terrified? Because I was terrified of people like yourselves, the general you, not you specifically, of hating me, of attacking me, because of what I read in the papers about how people felt about undocumented immigrants, how awful we were. So I was so scared. And I did it anyway, because I knew that it's either this or being in a detention facility. So I chose to go public, and my very first public appearance was actually at Senator John McCain, the late Senator John McCain's town hall rally. And that's where he came over to me, came up to me, asked me where I was from. I was the first speaker, actually, at this rally. Afterwards, he came up to me, confirmed where I was from, thanked me for my courage, and encouraged me to keep going, keep fighting the good fight. And so after that, I spoke on Capitol Hill. I spoke on behalf of the DREAM Act, and which we know has never been passed, has been rejected multiple times. Now, one of the other things I want to also point out that's somewhat ironic is that I would not have qualified for the DREAM Act then because I exceeded the age limit. I would not have qualified for DACA then or now. I mean, besides the fact that DACA is, well, it was revoked by the current administration, but it's still in limbo. I wouldn't, let's say DACA was not revoked. I still wouldn't qualify for it because I exceeded the age limit. So there are quite a number of people like myself who are not permanent residents, who are not U.S. citizens, who have no opportunity for DACA, who were undocumented indefinitely, who came here when they were 4 to a year old, who are not able to pursue their dreams, who don't know, who are living in the shadows, essentially. Right? So that's essentially my story, and like I said, there are a couple things that that I think we can all glean from my story that are related to you and how you navigate your space and your stories, right? So, as I mentioned, the way in which we judge people can destroy them, right? These are sometimes our unconscious biases. These are things that show up as stereotypes, right? And are communicated through microaggressions sometimes, right? So those can be examples of that could be, let's see. I have a good example. I remember someone years ago, actually during my undocumented immigration days, I was told, you don't sound like the rest of them, by someone, and someone who was part of the immigration administration process, right? They said, you don't sound like the rest of them. I think they were complimenting me, but it wasn't a compliment. So that's sometimes it can be a microaggression, and I can think of some other examples. But I want to talk about unconscious biases as it relates to you, but I want to first, continue back with how, with my own story of being here on campus, being in Hamilton College, and when I was in Hamilton and I showed you that previous slide, a couple slides ago, I was involved in all these activities. And one of the reasons was because I'm just an active person, I wanted to engage in the community, but the other was because I wanted people to see me beyond the biases that they associated or associate with the groups that I was attached to. Groups like being a woman, being black, being African, being dark-skinned, being undocumented, for those who knew, or illegal, right? And so when I talk about, those microaggressions that occurred, an example was, I could be in a class with someone for an entire semester, but when we're walking across campus, across the bridge, where we all see each other, the person would act like they'd never seen me before. That's a microaggression. So those are the things that when they happen once in a blue moon, you let it go, you think I'm being oversensitive, whatever. But if they keep happening, those things stay in people's mind, and they can destroy people. They really can. They really can. But on this other side of it, in addition to, or on the other side of dealing with these microaggressions because of some of the unconscious biases that I perceived, and I actually want to just, highlight one other thing about those unconscious biases and microaggressions. This is how I navigated through the space, through my space while I was at Hamilton. This is how I carried myself in a lot of ways. So I love this quote because what it says is, I am not who I think I am. I am not who you think I am. I am what I think you think I am. So as I'm mentioning, all those microaggressions, all those projected biases that at some point historically I collected in my bank of memories started to become the way that I perceived people to perceive me. So you become your own worst enemy. And that's how it destroys you. That's how it begins to destroy you and unravel you. However, in addition to those microaggressions and the unconscious biases and the judgment that I experienced at times on the campus, because they're subtle, right? I also experienced an incredible amount of kindness, inclusivity, and community from certain people who we mentioned earlier who are in this room, right? Outside of this room, across the campus, predominantly faculty and administrators and a few of my friends, right? Those were the people that did things throughout my undocumented immigrant journey, like drive me each way 3 hours. Barbara, I actually don't remember how far Buffalo was and how.
Well, we had and spent overnight.
Spent overnight, like it's 3 hours. We stayed the night to my hearings, right? Who invited me to come to dinner at their homes, so that I didn't feel like I didn't have a family, I didn't have a home. Included me in their home cooked meals, right? Who accompanied me to my court hearings, to my court cases, who asked me questions like, so what's the status? What can we do? Who do we reach out to? What letters do you need written, right? That is how the community supported me. They were looking out for me, and essentially what they said to me, at the same time that I experienced some people were telling me that you're different, you don't belong because you're different from me, I also experienced people saying, You're one of us. We're gonna protect you as much as we can. We're gonna take care of you. You're not alone. Right? So going back to those 2 points that I made, we have the ability to destroy people based on our judgments of them, our unconscious biases. We also have the ability to build people, save their lives through acts of kindness, including them in our community. So, with that, we actually are ready to go through the workshop, Phyllis. So how are we doing on time?
We're doing okay. Just keep going.
Keep going. All right. So I'm always conscious of the time, you guys. So now, what I want to do is, like I said, we all carry unconscious biases, and I think one of the ways that we can move through this, so my example is related to being an undocumented immigrant. Your example of journeying through the unconscious biases you carry of other groups, or the unconscious biases you've experienced yourself, are going to look different from mine. But I think the point is acknowledging that they exist, because that's the only way that we can move forward, right? So the examples that we're going to use today that I brought to you are related to undocumented immigrants, but keep in mind that this is a bigger conversation and can relate to lots of different areas of your lives. So in this exercise, I actually just want you guys, and I think there's a way, we need 6 groups. So how can we do this in the most efficient way possible? Count off.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so let's do that. We'll count off to 6.
1,
2, 3, 4,
5,
6, 2, 3,
5,
6.
1, 2,
3, 4.
5, 6, 1, 2, 3.
Did that work? Okay, I hope that works. All right, hopefully we have 2 people in this group. So let's have the ones over here. We'll just do it in numerical order. 1s, 2s, 3s, 4s, 5, 6, and so
There's 4s. 2, 1.
perfect. So what we're gonna do, and this might actually end up being, we'll see with time. If we don't have enough time to continue on to the next exercise, no problems.
Oh, who's 4?
I'm 4. 1, right? All right, so I'm just gonna do that.
3.
3.
1's over there.
5, 6,
3, right? Yes. Thank you. 4, 5. You're 4. 4.
You're 2?
Yeah. We're missing one more group. Which group has not, did I not give a photo to? Okay.
Over there.
Okay.
Are you 5? Oh, okay.
I'm teasing you.
And do we have, everyone has a photo? Okay, all right. As I realized Okay, so you guys, this exercise does not need to take a whole lot of time. I would say we're going to give you guys about 2 to 3 minutes to go through this. So, what you have in front of you is, if I can just get everybody's attention, please. What you have in front of you is a photo, our 2 photos side by side, right? And for the most part, the 2 people are within the same category in terms of gender, for the most part, with the exception of, I think, 1, in terms of ethnicity and or race, right? And you've got some descriptors right below the photos, right? And so one of those people is actually undocumented. I know for a fact because they actually have been in the news or have shared their story in some capacity publicly. So what I want you to do is just take a few minutes to discuss among your group. Who do you think is undocumented? Okay? And this is not meant to, and the reason I did it specifically in putting photos and people together is because in no way is this meant to be a trick in making you feel like you're racist or ethnic, you have some sort of bias in that way. But I do want you to focus on the immigration bias. So take 2 minutes to figure that out and then just answer the questions above.
I agree. I don't know why I was leaning towards this one.
Oh, you're group 4 too? You can join our group. No.
We're good.
Yeah, that is the
Even, I don't think anyone asked you.
Where they're from.
So you guys just take 1 more minute.
Why, the night?
Don't worry. All right, so if I can get your attention, everyone. I would love to, I don't want to put anyone on the spot, but I'd love, remember, this is a collective conversation. So, did anyone have challenges with this exercise or feel that it was weird? Yeah, okay, yeah. So why? Why was it weird?
I mean, it's insensitive to even guess.
Mm-hmm.
Even, especially seeing their faces.
Yeah.
I don't know, it's just looking them in the eye and be like, yeah, you're right.
Yeah. Why do you think I would even present this exercise?
Because we have unconscious bias,
Mhm.
and by doing this, we kind of maybe unearth some.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't realize what you don't know.
Yeah. Tell me more.
Well, we were trying to rationalize it according to our knowledge about Mexico
Right.
and El Salvador. And Mexico is closer, so easier,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yes.
But then the history of our relationship with El Salvador. And she's a little older.
Right. You guys are, obviously I'm working with a very advanced group of intellectuals here, which is great because do you think that the average person even goes that far to make those associations and assumptions? So what else do you think? Tell me more about why you think this exercise is important. Yes.
Well, I think what my mind went to, this was our sheet,
Mhm.
is that I think through media, through culture, through history, there are people who are phenotypically othered all the time.
Right.
So I probably, I was just thinking of what if it was too phenotypically Euro, people with Eurocentric.
Think we have an example
Yeah.
out
So,
there.
I sort of wouldn't assume that they're immigrants.
That's right, or
Versus,
undocumented.
yeah.
So that was an example.
And this is my last name. It's-
Interesting. John Cunningham. Actually, he was deported. He was in the New York Times. He was deported. He's an Irish immigrant who was deported earlier, I think last year. Yeah, he overstayed his visa, similar to me. He's deported. There's 16,000 Irish undocumented immigrants in the United States. Things that we don't necessarily, I love that your point, that you wouldn't necessarily think because we don't hear about people like this in the news. We don't see this in the news, right? We see one type, right? One phenotype. That's the phenotype that, not we, I use the collective, we generally, that's the association people make. What else did you gather from this quick exercise? Yes?
Like two people, they have similar background, but one is born and not. So
Right,
it's hard to trace. Yeah.
that's right. How do you know? You don't. But the media portrays this image, and subconsciously we start to believe that we can detect who should and should not be here. And I shared information because the media also does this sometimes. They give you the story. So you think, aha, I have the evidence as to why someone deserves to be here or doesn't. We all become the jury. Ironically, there isn't juries. There are no such thing as juries in the immigration courts. But we become the juries. We're the final arbiters of people's lives, right? So that's the other reason. So I'm going to go through some of these pictures. Tell me more. One more thing that you gathered from this exercise. Yes?
It just shows you how being biased is like very silly, because I felt very silly just looking at these two pictures and having to choose which one looks undocumented.
Right. How do we do this in our lives? Not with undocumented immigrants or documented with immigrants, but how have you experienced this happening before?
The thing that I find interesting is you helped us along.
Mm-hmm.
You helped us along by first letting us know that we're smart
Yes.
and we're intellectuals, but our average encounter, that does not come first.
That doesn't. Right.
So the bias comes out before you even know it.
Mm-hmm. It's unconscious.
Right,
We don't recognize it.
right.
We all have it. I have it too, right? It may not be around this because this is something that's so sensitive to me, but it might be around something else. So that was the whole point of this exercise. Remember, I said this story is really not about me anymore. It's about all of us and what we can glean from the story. And so I am not saying to beat yourself up and, and say you're a terrible person because you have biases. We all do. But the way to move from there and be kind and include people is to acknowledge that you have these biases. Acknowledge that there are tendencies that we have to associate people with certain ideas. We do it ultimately for our own safety and security, but it ends up excluding people. It can end up, and through that exclusion, we can actually destroy people. So that's what I'm just going to put up all the photos so we can all see what some of the other groups had, right? So like I said, in each photo, there's actually one person who's actually undocumented. Bamba John Bamba is, he's undocumented. He is a DACA recipient. He has gone publicly. All these people have gone publicly and shared their stories, right? So Julissa Arce, she has written, she has her second book coming out on being undocumented. She was the VP of Goldman Sachs, right? So when you hear stories like this, you're like, oh, there's no way that someone like this could have gone through that, right? And the other point that I'm making is there's no such thing as, there's no image, there's no position, status, amount of money, or lack thereof, that determines whether somebody is undocumented or not. So we can't pinpoint it. And as long as we can't pinpoint it, we may not have the right to make those decisions as to whether someone needs to go or not, right? Antonio Zulu, I think I'm pronouncing the last name right. Zulu, he actually was the DREAM Act was actually modeled based on him and another person, right? So he is actually, I would say, like the founder of the DREAM Act, right? Really amazing guy, went to Stony Brook University. He speaks all the time around immigration. Nancy Adosi, she is pre-med. She speaks on behalf of DACA. She was in the New York Times a few weeks ago, right? And like I said, John Cunningham. So I've gone through a couple of these photos. And Marcos, I don't know if I gave out this photo. I think we missed this one, so that's fine. So we went through, the debrief that we just discussed. This is what we have up here, right? There's no such thing as what an undocumented look. And so what I also want to hand out now, really quickly, is how are we doing on time? Do we need to wrap up Phyllis?
We got about 10 more minutes.
10 more minutes, okay. So, I'm gonna ask you guys this because this is a workshop and I wanna make it inclusive of your needs and your thoughts. We have the option of just finishing up and going over the myths and the facts around undocumented immigration, or I could actually give you real life scenarios that you can read through, take 5 minutes to read through, and share and discuss as a group. What would you guys like to do? Second choice. All right, love it. Okay, so
Can we get?
Yes.
In a second.
you will. Let's see. Okay. All right, so let's see. I'm gonna give you guys scenario 1. So, yes, perfect. That's scenario number 2.
Can we find out how many people guessed the right person? It's probably yes.
You know what? I don't know that people guess. I think some people may have guessed.
The right-
Some people didn't, and I think that's the point. It doesn't. It makes people uncomfortable to publicly communicate that we have these biases. But please go ahead. Number 4, group number 4, group 5, and group 6. So you guys, if you can take about 5 minutes, and I'm going to hand out, well, as you're reading, I'm going to start handing out the facts and the myths around immigration and undocumented immigration. But feel free to read collectively as a group your scenario. And what I'd love for you to do is just start thinking about the questions that are on the page or the questions that are actually on this slide, just the last 2 questions. How is your life parallel to that of the person in the case study? Are there any parallels at all? Any similarities? And how would your perception of this person have changed if you were only provided with a name or an occupation or a physical profile? What questions do you have? All right, so let's see if we have another, I'm gonna see if I can find another printout of each of the scenarios so you guys can read it. You don't all have to share one sheet of paper. Here's second, this is group number 3, right?
Yeah.
Number 4, 5, sorry that I, and number 6. There's a second copy. Mhm.
No, I'm just saying it's hard.
So, by the way, you guys, these are real life stories, okay? I didn't make up the stories. I just changed names where people asked me not to share their names. And I changed, I think there's one situation where I changed the country of origin. This is real. So just take about 5 more minutes. Yes, so I'd love for you guys to discuss as a group those last 2 questions. Just ignore the others because we don't have time. So just those last 2 questions. How is your life parallel to that person you're meeting? Are there any similarities? Anything you have in common? And then secondly, you know, how would your perception of this person have changed if you were only provided with their name, occupation, and or physical profile?
Trying to.
Let's go back to this, what made it? No, she's associated by. I would be just like
Yeah, I have to follow through the story to see what happened. That was actually last year, but it really happened.
So the house.
Any civil damages.
I think it is, I think, so I think sometimes we, as we talk about it, we might find.
Maybe nothing.
It's my,
Again, bias.
yeah, I was like, so it's classic.
Or at all. Whatever. They might ask, right, if they're doing it, those are just anxious people, not I don't know him, I'm a college student on these books, and I'm like, you can just figure this out. So it's like,
Acknowledge that. All right, you guys, so I want to be mindful of time, so even if you haven't had a chance to fully discuss your scenario or case study, I'd love to hear from 2 or 3 groups. What was your takeaway? How was your life, if you can summarize maybe in 2 bullets, what your situation is, or the case study situation presents itself to be, and how, is your life parallel to that in the case study? So if I can have a volunteer from a group.
I think you were probably my first undocumented.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so that's how, in the dark,
Mm-hmm.
much of this
Yeah.
area of the country is probably.
Yeah. Back in 2001,
Yeah.
there wasn't a movement.
Mm.
People were really living in the shadows.
Yeah.
And so many of those people are still undocumented. Yeah.
But on the hilltop, it was even more
Mm-hmm.
quiet.
That's right. Yep.
I mean,
was
there
taboo.
there may have been people who knew, but they didn't,
Yeah.
it wasn't all over the
Oh,
place.
yeah. It was just a few administrators and faculty, very few friends. Like, I'm talking 2. All right. What else have what else did you take away from your case study? Yes.
So our case study was about Kelly Russell, who's a 10-year-old girl who lost her mom and being raised by her father, but her father had to make a decision of whether or not he wanted to, as an undocumented person, go back to El Salvador
Mhm.
and take her with him or leave her for the foster care system.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and he has to make this decision because ICE sort of found him and
Yeah.
expedited his removal. at El Salvador.
Yeah, he actually has, had, as far as I know, I don't know where the story is now, but he had a, what is it called? A bracelet.
Bracelet.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Mhm.
And
So-
in terms of like parallels, the first one that I thought of was like as a black person, I'm targeted by the criminal justice system, the
Mm.
police in America. So as brown people, Kelly and her family are also targeted by another branch of the criminal justice system. If we could even call it that, that's a whole other competition, but just targeted based on like appearance. And so going back to the exercise before, like appearance, or do you look undocumented? Do you look like a criminal? And
Right.
how you're sort of targeted based on those assumptions.
That was part of the point I'm making, right? We can all identify with these individuals in different ways, and these biases that we experience or we project towards others may not come in the form of, are you an immigrant or not? Are you undocumented or not? But it comes in, hey, if you're a black man, are you a criminal? Are you a menace to society, right? That's how they show up. Yeah, absolutely. What else?
One thing that, my team members are both international students, and so they're here on visas, and so when they travel, the debate is whether to carry all of my documentation or just a little bit, because if something happens, then I gotta prove that I can be here, then I
That's
gotta
right.
prove that I go to college.
That's right.
Then if I do something and I get in an instance, I've had, international students who I had to go to court with to stop them
Wow.
from being kicked out of the country.
That's insane.
Yeah.
And I feel like, whenever, like, I'm going to a party with my friends, and they're like, yeah, drinking's fine, and I always have this another, like, layer that, like, they're, like, yes, I might get points, I might get, something in my record, but then again, deportation is always somehow on the table, and you don't know how far people want to take it.
Right. So deportation is one form of criminalization, similarly to what this other gentleman shared, right? So there's some parallels just in those stories that you're talking about, this fear of how someone's gonna perceive me, what's gonna happen next.
If you can get expelled, okay? Just remember
Yes,
that too.
that's, yeah.
That's the thing,
Expelled.
and
Yeah.
once you get expelled, and that's a
Yeah.
condition of your visa, you have to leave the country.
Yeah, that happens here.
Really?
Just keep going, pass it
Yeah.
on. Yes, absolutely. If you guys can take
Because of this.
one sheet and pass it along. What else? What other parallels did you pick up on? Yes.
Since I'm not been in that situation of having to be deported or not, or lose my father because he has to make that choice, some of us were thinking, well, we're female.
That's right.
I've lost people to cancer, lost a parent, was a kid, watched TV on Saturday mornings. That's kind of, try to, identifying parallels that.
Yeah. Yeah, who actually did that as well? Identify those parallels in that way. How is this person like me outside of their injustice around immigration? But how are they like me as a person, a student, in terms of gender, in terms of their desires in life? Did anyone else do that? I think I saw a hand up.
Or is risk.
Yes, yes.
So this was a student who was trying to apply for financial aid, but then he didn't have the documents. And I was thinking about, like, I normally have to apply for financial aid and I really depend on the school to pay for my financial aid. And for him, he can't get that because of that document. And I was thinking, what would happen if I didn't have my visa?
That's right.
Yeah, I would be
That's
kicked out
right.
of the school.
And that person is actually one of my mentees. Yeah, absolutely. So, yes,
I was
Phyllis.
just gonna say, there's one more situation where a person has made it here and is okay, and then it's their family who is not documented. And that has happened within our program, where the family member is not documented, verification comes up for that student, can't pay your bill, you can stay in the country, but you can't go to school, right? So this person, you strip away their future.
Right. And how can we relate to that example?
Oh, yeah.
How can we relate, how can any of us relate to that example? Love for you to share. Yes.
Well, I'm always in the mentality that it's not me going to college, it's my family. So even though I'm here right now, the assignments that I have, the work that I do is always related to them in some way, shape, or form.
Yep.
So, and the impacts are directly related, so choices that I'm making, successes, failures, all of that is related to them. So my mind is always there, like a part of me is always there. So it's sort of being stretched in all these different directions and sort of scatterbrained. So you sort of can't be fully present on campus or anything like that. So it's this sort of mind that you find yourself in.
Yeah, absolutely. So you guys nailed it. I mean, you took away a lot of things, and I want to be mindful of time, so I want to start wrapping it up, because we could spend a lot of time talking about this and unpacking this. But essentially, you shared a couple things. you are able to, in reading these case studies, you're able to connect with people in the forms of their dislocations, where they are experiencing inequality. Some of us can relate to that. Not the same type of inequality or injustice, but a different form. Some of us can relate to it in the form of, hey, this person shares common human interests as myself, right? This person, the example that Phyllis gave, this person, if they're not able to get financial aid, go to school, how are they like me? Because I value education too. What would it be like if I couldn't go to school? If I didn't have them. I've been through experiences where I couldn't pay my bills. Now, what if I didn't have any options to be able to pay those bills, those financial bills, right? So that's how we connect with people. And in this case, we use undocumented immigrants as an example. But in the larger scheme of things, when we are encountering people on the campus, particularly us students, remember I talked about, those instances where I experienced a microaggression here or there, where someone who sat with me in class for months, weeks actually, wouldn't even say hi to me when I walked past them, right? Microaggressions. And I'm sure that person was unconscious of what they were doing. What they're thinking is, hey, this person, I don't know, we don't have anything in common, so, oh well. But we do have things in common, right? If this person just thought, well, Martine is in the same class as me, we must have that in common, right? We're able to connect on that level. So that's how we start to create a community of inclusion and show kindness, just by considering the fact that we have something in common. And so that's what I want to leave you with. One of the points I want to leave you with. Assume that you have something in common with that person that may seem very different from you, right? The other is remembering that we don't always have to agree, with what someone says. We can accept what the individual says, right? So in many cases, we may have these biases because we don't agree with someone. It's one thing to agree, but it's another to just listen and say, I hear you, right? So that's another way that we can create a culture of inclusivity and a community at Hamilton. Be an ally. So this looks like a lot of different things. In the space of immigration, I have a whole conversation about how we can be allies, right? But on the larger scheme of things, being an ally is being a friend, exercising a level of empathy with individuals. So, hey, I don't understand everything you're going through, but I know that you may want a solution, and I'm going to support you in getting a solution, right? So that's the way we can be allies. Ask permission to ask dumb questions. So remember that I did not say ask dumb questions or ask questions that you feel that could offend someone, but ask permission. Person says yes, then you ask the question. So always ask permission. But don't be afraid to disagree with the masses. So there are going to be instances where you're going to be forced to make a decision, right? And you don't have to go with what everyone else is saying. You make the decision for yourself as to what you support, okay? Assume there's more to what you see at first glance. So that was the exercise we did a few minutes ago with the images, right? We should assume that when we see something and our bias comes up, there's more to that. There's more to the story, when people look at me. All the time, people assume, I say, I went to prep school, I went to Hamilton College, I went to grad school. So then people assume, I get people asking, were you an Army brat? Were your parents diplomats? They go, no, I didn't have parents. Then they're really confused. Then I go, I was undocumented for most of my life. And they're like, what? Blows their mind, right? So we've got to assume there's more. You can't judge a book by its cover. We always judge a book by its cover. But when we do that initially, we should then assume that there are more pages in that book that we should read. Lastly, we can share our resources, right? So when there are opportunities, if you hear about resources, someone comes to you and they need support, and and reassurance in some way, and you know about resources that exist, we can share those resources. So I actually, in terms of immigration and documented immigration, I just put up a bunch of resources that I know of, and I encourage you guys, this is the chance, if you can take a photo, take a snapshot, because if you know anyone who needs support in these areas, you want to point them in the right direction. So these are some of the organizations that I'm a part of, I work with, I encourage and I redirect some of, my mentees to, and I speak with on a, regular basis. So those are just some of the resources that are out there in the context of immigration. So I know we're right on time, or maybe we're over time at this point, and I know it's late in the evening, but I really want to thank you guys for your active participation, your involvement in this conversation. I'm going to ask if you can pass forward the handouts with the images of the individuals and the scenarios, only because those are real scenarios. People, we want to respect them. Like, people are okay with sharing those stories, but I don't want it to somehow end up in the wrong hands.
I'm gonna keep just this one, 'cause I'm gonna keep it right now.
Yes, absolutely. So I want to thank you guys so much for your
Well,
time.
thank you.
And yes, thank you so
I
much.
can see where this can go on and on. I do want to let you all know that if you would just sign this sheet of paper or print so I can understand your handwriting, But that we have a book, Martine's book, for each of you that are attending. And so I'll get that to you.
We're at the bookstore.
You don't need to go to the bookstore.
And I would love to leave you with this. So, Illegal Among Us. So this is, I left you with facts on immigration, undocumented immigration. Please look through that, double-sided sheet of paper. The PC term is undocumented. So illegal is a term that I've reclaimed, very much like some other groups reclaim certain terms that were used to degrade them. They reclaim it. And so that's what I've done with Illegal Among Us. But I'm not saying go around calling people illegal. Please don't do that. You can use that reference when you're talking about my book. But, I really do encourage you to use the terminology of undocumented. So I just wanted to make sure I mentioned that as well. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.